The knock came less than 24 hours after the funeral, and when I opened my front door, the woman who had always waved from the porch across the street stood there with trembling hands, empty eyes, and a grief so heavy it seemed to steal the daylight itself. She wasn't crying anymore. Somehow, that was even more frightening. She looked past me toward the warmth inside my home, took one slow breath, and whispered that she simply couldn't sit over there another minute because every chair, every photograph, every silent corner still believed her husband would walk back through the front door. In that heartbreaking moment, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of kindness begins with opening a door. Before this unforgettable journey begins, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing stories that remind us we are never truly alone. Her name was Meredith Lawson, and until that week she had been known throughout the neighborhood as the cheerful woman who filled her flower beds with bright colors every spring. She baked pies for new neighbors, remembered birthdays without needing reminders, and always found a reason to smile even on rainy afternoons. Her husband, Graham, had spent 42 years beside her. They had raised 2 daughters who now lived several states away, celebrated countless anniversaries, survived financial hardships, illnesses, and disappointments, and somehow still looked at each other as though they had only just fallen in love. Then everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Graham had collapsed while trimming the roses in the front yard. The ambulance arrived quickly, but sometimes life writes endings no one is prepared to read. The entire neighborhood stood quietly on their porches as the ambulance pulled away. By sunset, everyone knew he was gone. The following day was filled with visitors carrying flowers, casseroles, and sympathetic words. They meant well, but grief has a way of making even kindness feel distant. People stayed for a while before returning to their own routines, leaving Meredith alone in the house that had suddenly become far too large for one person. That was why she stood on my porch the morning after the funeral. I welcomed her inside without asking questions. She sat in the corner of the living room, wrapped both hands around a cup of tea she never drank, and stared through the window where sunlight painted soft patterns across the floor. Minutes passed in complete silence. Eventually she admitted that every room across the street reminded her of the life she had lost. Graham's reading glasses still rested beside his favorite chair. His unfinished crossword puzzle remained folded on the kitchen table. His gardening gloves were still hanging beside the back door. She wasn't ready to move them, but she also couldn't bear to look at them. For the first time since the funeral, someone wasn't trying to fix her pain. I simply listened. Over the next several weeks, a quiet routine developed without either of us planning it. Every morning after breakfast, Meredith would walk across the street carrying nothing but herself. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we sat together watching birds gather around the feeder in the backyard. Sometimes we worked on small puzzles or folded laundry without speaking a single word. Healing didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived one ordinary afternoon at a time. Neighbors began noticing that Meredith smiled occasionally. It wasn't the bright smile everyone remembered, but it was enough to remind us that hope still existed somewhere beneath the sadness. One afternoon she brought over a faded photograph she discovered while sorting through old boxes. It showed Graham standing beside an old pickup truck with an enormous grin across his face. Meredith laughed softly as she remembered that the truck barely worked, yet Graham insisted it was the greatest vehicle ever built because it had carried their daughters on countless camping trips. As she shared one memory after another, something remarkable happened. Instead of crying because Graham was gone, she started smiling because he had lived. That small change transformed everything. Inspired by her courage, several neighbors organized weekend lunches in the community garden. No one called them support meetings. They were simply afternoons where people gathered to share food, stories, and company. At first Meredith hesitated. Then she began bringing homemade bread. Soon she was teaching children how to plant flowers, just as Graham had once taught neighborhood kids how to grow tomatoes. Every blossom became another reminder that endings often make room for unexpected beginnings. Months passed beneath bright blue skies. One sunny afternoon, while cleaning her garage, Meredith discovered dozens of wooden birdhouses Graham had built but never painted. She almost donated them before realizing they represented one final unfinished dream. Instead, she carried every birdhouse into the driveway. The next Saturday, families from every nearby street gathered with paintbrushes, bright colors, and laughter. Children covered the little houses with rainbows, flowers, stars, and tiny handprints. Parents shared stories about loved ones they had lost. Grandparents spoke about marriages that had lasted decades. By late afternoon the driveway looked nothing like the place where grief had once settled. It looked alive. The painted birdhouses were placed throughout the neighborhood park, each one carrying a small plaque that simply read, "Love always finds its way home." Visitors often stopped to admire them without realizing they had been born from heartbreak. As autumn approached, Meredith made another difficult decision. She finally walked into Graham's study alone. She expected tears. Instead, she found gratitude. Every book on the shelf reminded her of conversations they had shared. Every handwritten note tucked between the pages reminded her that love leaves traces far stronger than sorrow. She carefully packed some belongings to donate, kept others close, and quietly thanked Graham for the life they had built together. When she closed the room's door that afternoon, she wasn't leaving him behind. She was carrying him forward. The neighborhood noticed another change. Meredith began welcoming newcomers exactly as she always had before tragedy entered her life. She delivered fresh bread to young couples moving into their first homes. She planted flowers outside the local library. She volunteered at the community center during daytime events, comforting others who had recently experienced loss. People often wondered how someone who had suffered so deeply could continue giving so much. The answer was simple. She understood what loneliness felt like. She never wanted another person to face it alone. One bright spring afternoon nearly a year later, another moving truck arrived across the street. A widower named Roland settled into the old house beside Meredith's. He kept mostly to himself, avoiding conversations and rarely stepping outside. The entire neighborhood remembered someone else who had once hidden behind closed curtains. Meredith baked an apple pie. She walked across the lawn. She knocked gently. Hours later they were sitting on his porch sharing stories about the people they had loved and lost. No one needed to know exactly what was said. Sometimes healing begins with recognizing your own pain in someone else's eyes. Watching that quiet moment from my own porch, I finally understood why Meredith had come to my door all those months ago. She hadn't needed advice. She hadn't needed solutions. She had simply needed somewhere her grief could breathe without judgment. That single act of opening my front door had quietly echoed through an entire neighborhood, inspiring friendships, restoring hope, and reminding all of us that compassion spreads farther than we ever imagine. Before this story comes to its close, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment and tell us, what simple act of kindness has helped you, or someone you know, through a difficult season of life. Your story may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. Years later, the flowers in Meredith's garden bloomed brighter than ever. Children still pointed excitedly toward the colorful birdhouses in the park. New families continued arriving, each welcomed by neighbors who understood that everyone carries struggles hidden beneath ordinary smiles. Graham's memory remained alive, not because people refused to let go, but because love had continued growing through every kind word, every shared meal, every open door, and every hand extended to someone standing alone. Meredith often said that grief never truly disappeared, but it slowly learned to walk beside gratitude instead of ahead of it. She discovered that the heart could carry both sorrow and joy at the same time, and that choosing kindness in the middle of pain was one of the bravest decisions a person could ever make. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May we all remember that sometimes the greatest miracle isn't finding the perfect words, it's simply opening the door when someone no longer has the strength to face their pain alone.